I'm Ainsley, coming to you from Waterloo University, and this is Climate Action Figures.
Well, hello and welcome to the very first episode of a brand new season, Season 2 of Climate Action Figures. Wonderful to have you along today. My name is John Whidden, and this week on the show, you get to meet Ainsley. Just before we do that, though, you may already know that we start each episode with what we call a quick fix. Now, this is something you are doing to look after the environment, your small part in helping mitigate climate change. And we rely on you, dear listener, or viewer, if you're tuning in on our YouTube channel, to take care of this part of the episode. We have a few from the past couple of months, but we need more. So please send yours in via Facebook, Instagram, or by email at climateactionfigures@gmail.com. Whatever you're doing to help out the environment, send us a quick note about that, and we will use it on a future episode. Now, without further ado, this week's quick fix, which comes to us from Linda in Alberta. Linda says, our library has things, not just books, but things like sewing machines. So if you need one of those, you can borrow it from the library. That is my tip for the week. Well, thank you very much for sending that in, Linda, and welcome, Ainsley.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and I love the tidbit from Linda. The public sewing machines, any public facility, things like that really helps mitigate some of the issues that we have in the meantime.
Yeah, it's amazing that libraries are now doing so much more than just books like they have traditionally done and loaning out all kinds of things, borrowing libraries. Very cool. Now, Ainsley, I understand you have just started your master's degree at the University of Waterloo. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I just started my master's program last week. It's the Master's of Arts in Global Governance at the University of Waterloo. It's through the Balsillie School of International Affairs, which is associated with CG, which is the Canadian Institute for Global Innovation, which is very cool. We have a whole separate section of that program dedicated to environmental issues on a national scale as well as a global international scale. And that is actually the focus of my research, is coming up with environmental international policy and researching the ways that we can go about creating these and fixing these issues on a global level.
Wow. So when I hear global governance, I think right away of the United Nations. Is there a huge component of that in all of the coursework you do?
Yes and no. We do explore a lot of international pre-existing organizations. So things like the UN, things like the EU, all of those different systems that currently exist, we will dive into. But that is both in a negative and a positive way, exploring why these are effective and where they are ineffective, what is successful about them and what is less so. And using that to kind of create our framework of how do we proceed from here? Where do we go in making these changes and making sure that the systems that we have survive, but not just survive, they actively improve and improve quality of life around the globe in general.
Now, Ainsley, that's very interesting. As soon as you talk about that, I think about COP, and I think the COP coming up in November is COP 29. So do you have strong feelings about the COP conferences?
I mean, I always have strong feelings in general, I find, about most things. With COP specifically, I think any chance that anyone gets, large groups of people get together to talk about these large issues, especially associated with the environment, is a positive thing inherently. It's great to get a discussion going, and it's great to keep people and governments and institutions and corporations accountable. On the flip side of things, whether or not that actually does hold people accountable, so to speak, and keep things on track is a different discussion. So my frame of research would be investigating, are these things that we currently have in place effective? And from my frame of mind, if not, where can we improve? Where are things enforceable? And is it enforceable on the governmental institutional level, or do we have to go straight to corporations in order to make sure that these things are addressed properly?
Yeah, that's always a big question, right? Can we trust that corporations, which is our economic model, will do what they need to do? Or do we have to have government and non-corporate bodies to regulate things? Do you have a strong feeling about that one?
It's hard to say. And to be fair, I'm only just beginning my master's research, so I don't have as much of a knowledge base as I'd like at the moment. From the perspective that I have right now, it does appear that just due to the nature of the system that we have built, our governmental institutions and our corporations are actually very, very closely tied potentially to a fault. And that's partly why we're running into so many issues with battling climate change and battling environmental issues on the corporate level, because they're so tied, and the economics of an election are typically funded through this corporation. It's very difficult to implement policy or have policy enforced on companies that are still supporting the people that are trying to enforce it.
True. Now, before we leave your education, when you get to the end of your master's, where do you hope to be and what do you hope to do with that?
So there's a couple of different opportunities within my master's, which helps kind of explore the different opportunities that are available. I have to do a MRP, which is a major research project. But I also am part of something that is called the fellowship, where we will write policy recommendations based on certain issues, and they will be sent to Global Affairs Canada and published at the end of our term. So that is an opportunity where I can see how I actually like policy writing myself, if that is something with Global Affairs Canada I'd like to pursue. And then we also have a leadership opportunity that can either be done through the Government of Canada. We have some people that have been sent to the UN to do their internship for a couple of months. So that also helps us branch off to see if there be any UN work or things like that. So I'm kind of looking at the whole field right now. Anything with UN, anything in government policy writing, it's all very interesting. So I'm not sure exactly, but just taking in the opportunities that the program has available and moving from there.
Great. Well, all the best with that as you continue with your education. Now, last year we talked with two amazing students, quite a bit younger than you, grade 6, from Port Elgin Regional School, Nate and Jackson. And the way we were connected with those two was via two wonderful educators who live in New Brunswick, Jennifer and Sean Cunningham. Sean having worked in Port Elgin School, and Jennifer and Sean happen to be your parents, if I'm not mistaken.
They sure are.
And if it's not clear already to our listener, they work hard to look after our natural environment and are concerned about climate change. So, how has hanging around with these two characters informed your view of the world?
They definitely are characters in many different senses of the word. I think they instilled in both myself as well as my siblings from a very young age how important the environment is and continues to be and will forever continue to be. We grew up on the East Coast, so we were very much raised outside. Most of our days were spent outside, either on the beach or in the backyard or in some sort of hiking capacity like that. And it just became a very normative thing to be outside and in the environment, and therefore to respect it and to take care of it. And that was kind of the utmost important factor, was if you respect something, which you rely on, and it's beautiful and all these different things it's needed, and it's something that needs to be taken care of. And that is ultimately our responsibility to do. And that was instilled in all of us, I believe, that all of these things that you can do, yes, you may harvest food, you may grow your own garden, things like that, but it's done in a way that is respectful to the environment and still perpetuating growth and sustainability.
So, this podcast is aimed mostly at youth, but there are certainly parents who listen. We know this from our listener feedback. What advice would you give to parents, or what do you suggest the role of parents are in this world with the environment being what it is?
I think that parents are the first and foremost the guide to their kids in all ways, and shaping how they view the world in general, both natural and in all other senses of the term. So I think if anything, it's having your kids outside, even if they're not doing anything other than running around in grass for a bit, being at a playground, going for walks, things like that. It's always the outside time that, one, sticks the most. Two, it'll make your kid more tired, which might be more beneficial to you. But in general, it instills respect for nature that I think is very important in today's world.
Great thoughts about parenting. And it's so true that if young people are outside, they invariably will fall in love with outside parks, wild spaces, etc., and they'll want to protect those things. So it's a natural way also to lead to that next generation wanting to protect our environment. Now, you mentioned briefly your siblings. Let's hope that they're going to listen into your episode. So do you want to give a shout out to them and the role they've played in your life?
Absolutely. So I'm the youngest of the three of us. So I have an older brother and an older sister who have probably helped raise me in more ways than one. And in that, as I think part of it is we were all raised outside together and all have this very environment forward mindset. If it's commuting in a way that's more environmentally friendly by walking or by public transit or things like that, stopping more locally, we've all kind of done that together and both lamented the state of the environment, but also celebrated it together. So it's very nice to have people that are around your age. So it's very noticeable that it's not just one or two people anymore. It is a large pockets of certain populations. So they are absolutely involved in this as much as I am, if not more. And even if it's from different avenues, they both have their own thoughts and contribute in various ways, which is great.
Right. Now, we didn't plan to talk about them, so and we haven't checked with I assume you haven't checked with them to ask their permission, so we maybe won't name them, but is there something that they have done specifically that you really look up to in terms of environmental action?
I mean, with food specifically, it's where they both excel, and that's in growing their own food, but especially cooking their own food, shopping more locally, things like that. They're definitely the better cooks between the three of us. But just the way that they handle food with care and in an environmentally conscious way, looking where food is coming from, checking the packaging before you buy for something that has much less hard plastic with its wrapping and packaging versus something that doesn't. Things like that. And it's just something that I think is always I've looked up to and it's something that I'm a little bit more lacking in. So having their knowledge base and using it and kind of pulling from it where as much as possible, it's something that I've always respected and admired.
Well, great to hear about what those two are doing. And yes, to packaging, it's there's so many things around the subject of food that we can be more careful about. But packaging just struck me last week. Our local superstore has a thing called flash food. I don't know if you have that out east, but it's food that's about to expire and they put it on for usually half price or less. And so you can just check the app and see what's about to get thrown out and you can buy it. They put it in a special cooler, you go pick it up, which was great. But I got some Caesar salad mix and I never usually buy that stuff because of the packaging, but it was going to get thrown out. So I bought it, brought it home, and it was wonderful. But oh my goodness, the cheese was in its own package, the dressing was in its own package, the croutons, the bacon bits, the salad. I mean, there were about 7 packages to this salad that we made. So crazy. We have to be careful with packaging these days. And there are some companies I know that's their thing. They send people this prepackaged food so they can just throw it in their pan and do it. But it's great that people are cooking for themselves. But what's the cost, right? Now, we're at the point in the program where we ask our guest, what is your climate action? So, have you picked something you want to talk about today, Ainsley?
Absolutely. And it was kind of brought up there by Linda with the quick fixes beforehand, but the use of public resources and using things communally is such an important aspect, I think, in today's society. To sacrifice the personal and immediate convenience for something that is a long-term game environmentally is a tough thing to do. And it's a tough ask for a lot of people where convenience is so highly valued right now, and especially nowadays, but it makes such a difference. And I find it's especially important when it comes to things like public transit, even like the sewing machines, using those in a public forum, sharing things with if you have roommates or anything like that, so that you're pooling resources rather than using them all separately is a great way to ensure that you're promoting sustainability, using things consciously. And even if that is not always possible, trying to find another way to mitigate it so that you're more aware of what you're doing and what your impact is on the everyday environment.
Now, Ainsley, we've asked a number of our guests last season to comment on where they are at in terms of the environment. So, if we can kind of quantify that on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being don't even think about it, it doesn't bother me in the least, to 10 being I'm losing sleep all the time and I can't be happy. Where would you be on that scale?
I mean, sometimes I find it depends day to day. I think that the winter months are always when people feel it the most because they get hit with the most storms, or whenever it's in the summer, you're getting those really hot days. That's when we really notice it more often. And it's not easy, but it's easier to put things out of mind when it's out of sight. I think in general, where it is the main focus of my research, I've obviously pegged it as something that is very important to me. So I place it as a 7 for my personal self, just because it is where I'm planning on spending the majority of my thesis research. It is something where, out of all the things that I could have fixed for global governance and global policy. To me, the environment is one of the most, if not the most pressing issue of our time.
Now, could I ask you to extend that to your cohort at university? And not necessarily your friend group, but maybe you could say your friend group, but they might be more environmentally minded because that's part of who you are. But the whole group at university, I know you can't speak for everyone, but what's the sense you get about your cohort at university?
So I'm lucky enough to be in a program that there's only 16 of us total. So I do know the mindset of the individuals fairly well, and as well as their specific interests. I know for Waterloo as a whole, they do have a lot of climate action and environmental groups, which is great. And they are also, from my perspective as someone who's not native to Waterloo, the city of Waterloo does seem very public transit friendly, which is lovely to see. And is always one of the first things that comes to my mind when it comes to climate action to reduce kind of the amount of cars on the road and the amount of emissions. For my cohort specifically and the Master's of Arts in Global Governance, environment is now ingrained very deeply into a lot of political science and global governance programs, which is great. So even if it is not their specific niche interest or their focus, it is still something that is brought in. Human rights and therefore the impact of the environment on human rights is still in association with each other. Peace and security conflict still ties into the environment. So even if it isn't the number one focus, the environment has made its way so that it covers every single member of the MEG group, which is something that is nice to see because it shows how universal it really is.
If you could take a guess at where your compadres at university would be on that scale, would you guess it's similar to where you are?
I would say for the most part, it is definitely around the same level. Some might be a couple points lower, some might be a couple points higher, but in general, there does seem to be a understanding that the environment is something that needs to be at the forefront of a lot of our understanding, our learning, our academia, all of that, which is very nice to see. It is not a one person or a two-person project. It is very much the whole collective sitting on a 7 or 8 where it's recognized that this is an important issue.
Out here in Alberta, we tend to get this dichotomy between economy and environment. Which one are you for, one or the other? And this seems problematic. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I have many thoughts about that, and we'll make this a very, very long episode. So I will try and keep it brief. I think that especially now where there are so many people that are struggling with the economy where it is, being able to afford rent, being able to afford groceries, I completely understand those that are saying, well, if it's not economically feasible, then we can't focus on it right now. Because to them, they have higher, more pressing issues for the time being. I do, however, think that the environment and the economy do not have to be opposed to each other. And in more than one instance, we have shown that green energy resources are actually very lucrative, and that finding and displaying that and making it so that the industries whose economy and economic prosperity doesn't tie to green energy can still be prosperous in a green energy world. I think that is where we would see improvement. That is where we would see people deviate from what they know and deviate from the fear of environmental sustainability. You have to tie in an economic aspect, or else you won't be able to win everyone over, and it won't be sustainable economically in the long run, even if it's environmentally sustainable. So kind of bridging that gap and tying those two worlds together is, in my mind, one of the main ways that we need to continue or need to go forward to make sure that this is actually something that's possible.
Well, Ainsley, you may have answered my last question already, because I was just about to ask you what gives you hope, and that's quite a hopeful message that you just shared. So is there something else in particular that gives you hope these days?
I think it's genuinely just the overall mindset seems to have shifted dramatically, even from, I'm not that old, but even from my time in middle school, high school to now, in my master's degree, it is very much the norm for everyone to be environmentally conscious, or at least somewhat aware. It is the norm to have at least 1 to 2 weeks of lecture and syllabus and readings dedicated to environmental academia and literature. And it's very much portrayed as a necessity now. It is accepted that this is going to continue to be an issue and continue to need to be addressed. That is something that, to me, is very hopeful. It shows that people are paying attention, and not only are they paying attention, but they care enough to write about all of these issues and explore where do we go from here. The more minds you get to it, the more likely we are to approach these issues and
Well, this podcast is all about hope. So thank you very much for sharing that little glimpse of hope, maybe more than a little glimpse, a large glimpse of hope. It's been great having you on the first episode of season 2. So thank you so much for joining us here today, Ainsley.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been absolutely wonderful.
And thank you, dear listener. If you know anyone who would be a great guest on the podcast, please get in touch with us via our email address or social media. And we will be back again next week, same time, same place, to hear from another climate action figure. Until then,
go figures.
This has been Climate Action Figures. Our show is produced and hosted by John Whidden. Our creative consultant is Kayla McIntosh. Our theme song is Hawaii Vacation by Tavari. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Climate Action Figures. That's all one word. And if you have any other questions or comments that arose from this or any episode, feel free to reach out to us at climateactionfigures@gmail.com. And thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another Climate Action Figure.